How was your rest? You had a good break? Okay, now let's go out with our second session. And now we're going to look. Initially, we looked through what is wilderness experience and what's the mind of God. When He brings us to the wilderness experience and what's the mind of man. And now we're going to look into a few of the characters who have gone through wilderness experience and how they have responded and how they've been equipped and how they are serving and fulfilling the mission that God has for them. And for the lesson that we're going to learn today, the character would be on Joseph. Okay, you can read about Joseph in the book of Genesis, chapter 37 onwards, and I believe all of you all know about Joseph by heart. We all know that Joseph, we see him first in the Bible as a 17-year-old shepherd boy. Joseph, who was a very confident, youthful boy, and you also know that he is the father's favorite, and that the father gave him one of the best coat that he had, a coat of many colors, and that showed that the father favored him above all the other brothers that he had. And we also know that he is a talebearer. You know why? Because we read through that how he would go out and see what the brother does and come back and tell the father all that and report all that the brother had done. And this actually opened door to conflict, betrayal, and hatred. And that's one thing we have always got to learn is that as parents, never look favor upon one child above the other. Never love one child more than the other, and always be fair, and never show special favor, because this can relate to hatred, anger, and conflict and betrayal in a family. And also we also saw that God saw the potential in Joseph, and God connected with Joseph in a dream. He had the potential to dream big. We've seen that. But in the initial part, we'll see that he lacked the ability to either interpret or the resources to bring to fulfillment his dreams. And in fact, if we look into the book of Genesis, chapter 37, you'll find that when the first dream he had, what did he dream? He dreamed that his the when they were gathering the wheat and the barns, when they gathered it, he stood up, and the brothers once all bowed down to him. And then what did the brothers say? It was the brothers, the one who interpreted and said, "What do you think? That we will bow down to you and you will be above us?" And then he had the second dream. The second dream he dreamed was the moon, the sun, and the stars bowed down to him. And then this time, it wasn't him who interpreted, but the father who said that. What do you think? You think that your mother and myself and your brothers will bow down to you? Here we see that he can dream, but he doesn't have the ability to interpret his dream. You know, and but somehow or other, God had favor with Joseph, and God connected with Joseph with dream. Joseph's wilderness experience began when his brother sold him into slavery. And then we can actually divide Joseph's wilderness experience into four, which is the first one will be the pit experience, the slave experience, the prison experience, and the palace experience. It was necessary for God to bring Joseph into this wilderness experience, into this difficult moment that Joseph had to go. God had to change Joseph's mentality and attitude in life. Through this wilderness experience, God trained him from one level to, because if you look into it, from one level to another, 4 different levels he had to go through, one level after the other, until he came to the utmost part, until he led to the highest of the ladder of triumph. And then he also learned that what matters was not so much as the circumstances of life or event, but his response to them. In the sense that he learned that what happens around him it doesn't matter much, but how did he respond within his heart towards the circumstances matters. And here, through this wilderness experience, he learned with God's supernatural assistance, any situation can be used for good, even when others intended evil. These are the things God had to teach Joseph. That is why God had to bring him into this wilderness experience. And the first experience let's look through would be his pit experience. And we all know that, right? The brothers took him, wanted to kill him, then they decided to throw him into the pit. When he was thrown into the pit, it was just contrary, just the opposite of his dream. In his dream, he dreamt that God promised him that he will be above upward strength in his life. That means he'll be above everybody. He'll be a leader. He'll be right above everybody. But here in the pit experience, Joseph was offered just the opposite of what he dreamed. He was thrown down into the pit and now he was just below everybody. Instead of being on top of his brother, he's now down in the pit without his beautiful robe. The brothers took away his beautiful robe. He lost everything. Now God began to break his youthful pride. This was necessary for God to allow him to go through this pit. This pit experience was God was breaking his youthful pride. God was teaching him to rely on God. To rely on God. God is teaching him to rely on God. No, God during this um, pit experience, when he was thrown into the pit, he had got two choices. He can react negatively or he can respond to the circumstances of his life. Now he got two choices to do. Joseph learned a very important lesson. It doesn't matter what happened to him, but what matters was what happened inside him. That matters a lot. And then because God was teaching him that to God, his comfort was not that important. To God, to break his youthful pride, took away his comfort and took away his parental protection, and now teaching him to rely on God. He's teaching him not to rely on anything else but to rely on God. Many a times when we are allowed to go through a difficult life, when life begin to destroy our peace, our eternal peace, how do we react? Most of the time, we get very discouraged, we get very frustrated, and we get very dejected. We react towards the things that happen to our life, and that destroys our eternal peace. But Joseph saw it differently. He did not give up. He did not see it as a dead end, but as a challenge. He never opened up his mouth and reacted to it. He allowed God's providential will to prevail. His brothers sold him into slavery without his beautiful robe. He now had to depend on God for clothing and for sustenance. He believed that God will give him another robe. Now, here we find that God was teaching him to rely on God, and this is what he learned during the pit experience. He did not open his mouth, he did not murmur, he did not react frustration, he did not get dejected, he wasn't depressed, angry, or frustrated, but he learned to rely on God. He did not even open his mouth. If you look through the Bible, you don't see him complaining or commenting on the experience that he had in the pit. This was what God taught him during the pit experience. His second experience, important lesson that he learned was it does not matter what happened to him, but what happens in him. His reaction, his response toward the circumstances is more important than what is happening around him. He did not give up, did not see it as a defeat, but as a challenge, did not open his mouth to react, did allow God's providential will to prevail. His brother sold him without his beautiful robe. He depended on God for clothing and sustenance. He did believe that God will provide him with another robe. This was the lesson he learned during his big experience. And then his second experience of wilderness began when he was sold in the land of Egypt. Okay, now Joseph has been taken down to Egypt, and here we find Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's official. The captain of the guard bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. Okay, that's what if you read in Genesis chapter 39, verse 1. Joseph was sold as a slave in Egypt. Why would God allow this to happen to Joseph? Joseph was taken away against his free will into Egypt, where he was purchased by Pharaoh's official to become a house slave. Despite the radical change in his situation, the betrayal of his brother, Joseph did not turn away from God. In fact, he did the opposite. Joseph drew even closer to God, even through this slave experience. He remained righteous man throughout his ordeal, undeterred and godly. God honored Joseph's faithfulness by blessing his work in his Egyptian master's house. And that was the beautiful thing about Joseph, is that even he was sold as a slave, now he is a slave, rather than being a favored son with a father in a strange land with strange people, and now instead of being a master of a house, he's just a slave. But yet he was so faithful, he was true, he still was righteous, undeterred and godly. And we find that if you read through Genesis 39 verse 2 to 3, the Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. The Lord gave him success in everything he did. Because Joseph was faithful, because he still honored God, he still trusted God, he was undeterred, and he was still very godly, he found favor with God. That's what the Bible tells us. If you do not know where God is bringing you, you may not appreciate what God is putting you through. It was necessary for Joseph to be in the slave market because God had prepared Potiphar, an Egyptian official in Pharaoh's court, to buy and restore Joseph by now giving him a robe of authority which earned him favor. We find that now Joseph was taken away from his coat of many colors, coat of favor, taken away from here. But during the slave experience, you find that now Potiphar makes him in charge of his household. And he was given authority over Potiphar's household. Now what did Joseph earn? Now he has honor, he has respect among the member of Potiphar's household. He was taken away from the coat of many colors, and now God has blessed him with a coat of authority. Every circumstances in life is subjected to changes. If God is on your side, he will always bestow you to his favor. And this is what Joseph learned during his slave experience. Though he was taken away against his will, put in a strange land, he was still faithful. He still trusted God. He was still holding on to the promise that God has connected him with, that dream. And from this slave experience led him to the next experience, which is actually the prison experience. We saw that before the prison phase, Joseph's life, how he enjoyed the Lord's favor and prosperity. Before he was thrown into the prison, you find that he enjoyed favor and prosperity in the house of Potiphar. The Lord gave him success in everything he did. He put him in charge of Potiphar's household. and he was entrusted with everything that Potiphar had. However, this favor did not last long. And we all know that Potiphar's wife took notice of Joseph in an evil way. This was going to be a continuous wilderness experience for Joseph. Joseph was committed. That's what we see. He was committed, he was loyal, he was faithful, and there was integrity in him. Surprisingly, Potiphar's wife did not look into all this good character that Joseph had, but she only saw his physical structure and how handsome he was. Joseph, through his experience, has seen God's protection, he has seen God's favor and God's love in his life. His experience with God grew even deeper. He was committed to God and he was committed to Potiphar. And we find that he was honest and he had his personal integrity, which he valued so much. He valued his personal integrity more than the pleasure that he could enjoy for a season, for a short season. He did not. He did not give in to the desires of the flesh, but he stood faithful to God and he stood faithful to his master, and he held on to his personal integrity. Joseph was spiritually sensitive to the consequences of acting against God and his master. He knew what it was, what it would be to go against God and against his master. And because of that, he stood faithful to God and he held on to his personal integrity. Now, as we study the wilderness experience of Joseph, one very important question comes into mind. A person's integrity is measured by the extent he gives in into a temptation. How do we value our integrity? The worth of a person's integrity is measured how quickly we give into temptation. And here we find that Joseph valued his integrity and he did not give in to his desire of the flesh. He did not give in to it. He held on to his integrity because he was a person of integrity. Joseph continued clinging on. Joseph continued declining in the advance of Potiphar's wife. And he stood honest, and we all know what happened to him was he ran away from Potiphar's wife. She rolled on to his coat and she falsely accused him and lied about him. And we all know the result was Potiphar was furious and he took Joseph and put him into prison and placed him in the king's prison where he was confined. Once again, here we see that Joseph's cloak was taken away, his cloak of authority in Potiphar's house, his personal integrity among the household servant, and his master was lost. He lost again, he was thrown down again, taken away from his authority, taken away from the court of authority, and is thrown into the prison. Who will restore back what Joseph has lost, his integrity? Who will bring him back? Is it the reward you get for being loyal, honest, and faithful? Who will believe Joseph? Even Potiphar, who once trusted him, didn't trust him at all. In a situation like this, we might think that Joseph might have thought, "Oh, I'm a fool. Who do I think I am? I thought something will come out of my life. Here I am in a strange land. My family hates me. My family rejected me. I was lied about. I was innocent. It was unjust and unfair. I should actually die rather than staying here." If you and I were in a situation like Joseph, maybe this is how we would think. We would think, "Oh, life is useless. I cannot trust God. I'd rather die than to lose my pride and integrity." That's what you think, that But strangely, you find that he did not react in that manner, because Joseph knew who he was. He knew that the connection that he had with God, I'm going to be the product of my vision. The vision he had that he was going to be a king, he was going to be a leader. And he sees himself as a king, he sees himself as a leader. And when you see him in the prison, he walked like royalty around the prison. And we all know that what happened every time he touched, everything he touched, even in prison, God blessed him because he was faithful, because he was honest, because he was loyal, and above all, because he trusted the God who has given him a dream. He trusted in the God he believes, and he knew that God, will one day bring him to the position that God has given the dream that he would be, and he trusted in God. If you don't forget who you are, you will be blessed in what you do. Just like Joseph, he knew who he was in God, and in that and God blessed him. In such a circumstances, only God can vindicate him. You know, if you look into it strategically, he was placed in a king's prison and not in a general prison. In those days, in Egypt, there were two kind of prison. One is a king's prison, another one is a general prison where the common people would go into a general prison. And then the king prison would be those of royalty and those who work with the king. Whoever commits a crime will go into the king's prison. And if you would look later part, you will understand why God had to put him into the king's prison. God here, in the prison experience, God was training Joseph's spirit to depend on God in all circumstances. He earned favor with everyone he went with. He learned never to complain no matter what happened in whatever situation. He was sure within him that God was up to something. And he knew that he's going to be the product of his vision. And he sees himself as a king. He walked like royalty around the prison. You know what happened? In everything he touched, God blessed him. And then, as I said before, if you don't forget who you are, you will be blessed in what you do. Everywhere he went, God's hand was upon him. And if you read in Genesis chapter 39, verse 21 to 23, it says that the Lord was with him, with Joseph. He showed Joseph kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in prison. He was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in everything he did. In this prison experience, we would learn that God was developing Joseph's gift. Because in that prison, during that solitary moment, that confined solitary moment where he learned to meditate and seek God, and it is here where he developed his gift. And we all know that his gift is what? To interpret dream. And during this confined solitary moment, God was developing his character, developing his gift. And if you see that in later part, we'll find that in this prison, the cupbearer and the baker had two strange dreams. And who did God send? It was Joseph who was able to interpret the dream. Once upon a time, many years back, when he had a dream, he wasn't able to interpret the dream. But now here, years later, when the two of them were in prison, he was able to develop that gift which God gave him when he was this. Sometimes it is this confined moment, this solitary moment, this intimate moment with God is where he learned his gift. He experienced his gift, and God started to use him there. And then we find that years later, 2 years later, the king had two strange dreams. And here again, Joseph was taken up. The cupbearer then remembered Joseph when nobody else could interpret the dream. Takes Joseph and tells the king about Joseph. And here Joseph develops. Here Joseph comes about and interpret the dream. And you find that in the prison, God developed this personal, developed his divine ability to interpret dream. And we learn that it was the knowledge of God that helped him to interpret the dream. Learn to give God glory for all the divine ability that God has given to him. This is what he learned in the prison experience, a valuable lesson he learned, that in everything, all glory goes to God, because God has given that. God gave him this divine ability, and he gives God the glory when he interprets the dream to the king. And from there, we see his fourth experience was his palace experience. Here we find that he was able to interpret the dream. He outlined the strategies to take place to fulfill this dream. He advised Pharaoh what should be done. In Genesis chapter 41, verse 33 to 44, he advised Pharaoh what to do if you read through. So Pharaoh said to Joseph in verse 41, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet from his finger and put it into Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robe of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck, and had him ride in chariot as his second in command. And the people shouted before him, Make way! Thus put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, but without your word no one will lift their hand or feet in all Egypt. If Joseph had, if he had hold on to that bitterness when the brother took away his coat of many colors, he would have lost this coat of authority, a coat where he is now in charge of the whole nation of Egypt. He would have lost that. Sometimes good we have must go to receive the best. The coat of many colors was good, but the best is yet to come. Sometimes God knows what is best for us, and when we allow God to mold us into the way He wants us, then He gives us the best. Joseph's wilderness experience brought him favor and promotion. If Joseph still remained bitter with his brother for taking away his many colors of robe, he would have missed this robe of Pharaoh, which has brought him honor and dignity. We learn that we have to let go to let God have His way. If we understand the principle in life, if we have learned to surrender everything to God, whatever it might be, our hatred, our bitterness, our anger, our frustration, if we have learned to hand it over into the hands of God, He will change our situation, just like how we see in Joseph's life. Joseph's brother could not believe what they saw. And here in Genesis chapter 50, verse 19 to 21, but Joseph said to them, to his brother, Don't be afraid. I am in this place of God. You intended harm to me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done and saving many lives. So then, don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children, and reassured that reassured them and spoke kindly to them. Joseph's brother thought evil against him, God meant for good. God will interpret the final outcome of our enemy's desire in our favor if we learn to put our confidence and trust in God. In whatever situation Joseph was, he was faithful and he waited for God to act. Joseph knew that he was going to be the vision, he was going to be the product of his vision. If you don't forget who you are, eventually those unresolved circumstances is going to be resolved. That dream is going to come to pass if you're in your life, if you will not forsake and forget who you are in Christ Jesus. You, your family, your work, everything will learn to trust in God. He will ultimately bring the result. The fact that we all get amnesia and we forget who we are, and we forget that who we are in Christ Jesus. And that is something that we should not forget, who we are in Christ, a child of God, and that God is in control of our life. Now imagine, I mean, just imagine for a moment that you are in a race, in an Olympic game, in a stadium, in a big large stadium, and you're running, taking a very long run. You're running and running and running, and you look up, and then up there you saw an old man with white beard. You ask, who is this sitting there? And then he said, I'm Noah. And Noah said, it took me 120 years to get that promise fulfilled. So don't give up. Press on, and don't give up your courage. Press on and press on, and one day you will achieve that promise. And then you continue running, and then you see wild animals and people trying to swallow you up, taking your money and wanting to kill everything, wanting to kill your words and wanting to kill you. And you looked up and said, who is that? The person said, I'm Daniel. The lion won't eat up. Keep running. Don't stop. Don't give up. Don't give up your right now. Just keep running. These are experiences that you will see. Noah 220 years to get his promise fulfilled. Daniel did not give up. God saw him through. Life of Joseph, we saw one after the other, lies, cheating, treated him badly, but eventually Joseph became one who's in charge of the entire nation of Egypt. Jesus sends us to say that don't give up. He was thrown into the tomb for 3 days, but he did not stay there dead. He rose up and alive again. No way you will stay in a tomb. No way you're going to lay there dead. You are going to rise and stay victorious. That's what Jesus says. Put your trust in God. Keep running. Keep trusting in God. Do not let circumstances, situation take you away from what God has in mind. God has a destiny for us. God has a purpose and plan. And these experiences, sometimes the wilderness experience that you go through, God has to train us and mold us to make us more like Him. And here we see through Joseph's life that he did not utter a word, he did not give up, he did not hold on to bitterness, he was not angry with his brother, but he recognized, he knew that God was in charge, God was in control, and God connected him with a dream, and he held on unto the dream, and he believed in the God that he served is a faithful God who will bring through. Even though he is going through this difficult moment, he knew that God will bring him finally to the destination that God has for him. And he stood faithful to God, and he was loyal, he was a man of honesty, man of integrity, and a man who loved God and who trusted God. And ultimately, God brought him to the position of a person who is in charge of a nation. Consider it pure joy whenever you face trial of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be matured and complete, not lacking of anything. That's what James 1 2 to 4 says. Persevere and do not give up, because God has a purpose and a plan for our life. So we'll come to the end of this session, and I'll meet you the next session. Have a great